Who was the man the Chinese government blamed for inciting the June 4th protests? You may think he was a firebrand or a revolutionary, but he was actually an astrophysicist, and a mild-mannered one at that. So how did an astrophysicist get scapegoated for causing one of the world's most famous protests, which led to one of the world's most infamous massacres? Fang Lizhi was born in Beijing on February the 12th, 1936, during a turbulent time in Chinese history. His childhood was framed by the Second Sino-Japanese War, his brother's death, his own miraculous recovery from illness, and the rekindling of the Chinese Civil War. Yet he had as normal a childhood as one could manage to have. He tinkered with radios for fun, went to school, then Peking University, and eventually graduated with a degree in physics into a China that looks very different from the one he had been born into. This was now Mao's new China. He was selected to join the team building China's first nuclear reactor, one of Mao's most important projects. But it was also the 100 Flowers campaign, where people were encouraged to vent criticisms of party policy. He helped pen a critical letter, but didn't even have time to publish it before Mao, on June 8, 1957, announced the start of the anti-rightist campaign. He was safe from the first round of persecutions, but the man who had been picked to run the campaign, a certain Deng Xiaoping, visited Peking University in 1958, during which he implied that the quota of rightists there wasn't enough. Just like that, he was found out. This would not be the first time where Fang was sentenced to manual labor in the countryside. Over the next decade and a half, Fang and many of his colleagues would be subject to Mao's whims, shunted to the middle of nowhere during each persecution campaign, and only allowed to return when his attention wandered. During the Cultural Revolution, it wasn't just he who was relocated. The entire university was moved from Beijing to Anhui province for another round of re-education in a coal mine. What force can cancel out the psychological pressure of the mine shaft and the stink of rotting corpses other than the planets eternally revolving in the star-studded heavens? He writes. In the belly of the earth, he learned to love the worlds beyond it. He learned to love astrophysics. Astrophysicists have often been defiant of authority, just like Copernicus, Galileo, and others of the heliocentric movement who refused to yield to the Church. There is something about the subjects of space that drives one to stand against dogma for the objective proof. There was no room for Fang in the Mao dynasty, but his days were numbered anyway. In 1976, Mao died. Western scholars credit a single man, Deng Xiaoping, for the successes of the reform and opening up era. This is woefully inaccurate. Rather, it was due to the efforts of people like Fang, who pushed against the system to find that it didn't know how to push back. There was an understanding that struggle sessions were out of style, but did that mean letting him say whatever he wanted? Nobody was sure. In 1984, he was made vice principal of the University of Science and Technology of China. His tenure was short, lasting only 5 years, but in these 5 years he changed USTC into a bastion of academic freedom. He began by correcting the commonly held belief that university was an opportunity bestowed upon them by the party. Because thinking and learning are natural rights, he said, the party's explanation is a feudalist idea. As more and more students asked him radical questions, he did not give non-committal diplomatic answers, but answered them honestly, according to his own beliefs. Marxism-Leninism is an outdated ideology, he claims, and it wasn't conducive to scientific research. In 1986, USCC students marched for open and representative elections using a familiar slogan, "Democracy is not bestowed." Fang had tried to dissuade his students from demonstrating. Of course, this wasn't to limit their freedom of expression. He was afraid of the brutal repression that could follow. As such, when USCC students surrounded the local seat of government, he was instrumental in going between student leaders and government officials in creating a peaceful resolution. In 1989, amidst a protest movement orders of magnitude greater than anything China had seen, he was in turn dissuaded from speaking out by his colleagues and friends. Fang Lizhi ultimately had nothing much to do with the protest movement he is so associated with today. He had never advocated for students to occupy the square. They did so of their own accord. In the final week of May, he toured the Han Temple in Shanxi during a conference. Built on a vertical cliff face, it was meant to symbolize how one had to let go of worldly desires to reach enlightenment. At this moment in time, however, it seemed more like a reflection of China itself, at the precipice of a society-shattering fall.
Going too much. Tiananmen Square. Why? Why? I think this is my duty.
The 10 days after came as a blur. Soldiers of the People's Liberation Army occupied their own capital in the same brutal manner as the Imperial Japanese Army had 50 years prior. The party's rumor mill had been making Fang into a scapegoat since mid-May, and the Americans, sensing this, decided to invite Fang and his family to their embassy to stay for a short while. After several rounds of negotiations, Deng agreed to let him live in exile, and Fang would spend the final third of his life researching at the University of Arizona until his death in 2012. Fang Lizhi may have been a mild-mannered astrophysicist, but this single man was one of the most powerful liberalizing forces to shape Chinese university students in the 80s. To the traditionalist autocratic party, he was one of the biggest threats to their rule, as he embodied the symbiotic relationship between science and democracy. The legacy, the intellectuals of the New Culture movement and the students of the May 4th movement at the turn of the 20th century, from Hu Shi and Cai Yuanpei to Fang Lizhi and Liu Xiaobo, has the idea of free expression, the cornerstone of this relationship, flowed. When a female student at Nanjing Communications College first raised a piece of blank A4 paper at a vigil for Room T5 victims and the zero-COVID policy which caused their death, thus sparking the 2022 White Paper protests, it was an exercise in free expression and a passing of its torch to this generation. Fang Lizhi would have been proud.